Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Harris and I'm an investment associate and CFA charter holder, and in today's video I'm going to go through how I study. Now, I completed the CFA charter this year, scoring in the 90th percentile at all applicable levels, and prior to that I studied chemistry at Imperial College London, where I got a strong 2-1 and scored a first class grade in my final year. However, my study strategy was not always this effective, so in the first 2 years of my degree, unsurprisingly, alongside the fact that I wasn't as serious as I needed to be, my study strategy was pretty ineffective. And I've spent the last few years improving this to the point where now I'm confident in sharing it with you, and hopefully will help you achieve your potential too. I'll split the video into 3, so the first part will be motivation, the second part will be a broad strategy, and the third part will be specific tips and techniques. So let's get into it. Okay, let's start with motivation. So this one's a simple one. It's not the most glamorous, but it's very important. Study something that you find genuinely interesting. The reality is anything worth studying is going to take at least 3 years. So the CFA took me 3 years, a degree takes 3 years or more, and essentially whatever you choose to study is going to require long-term dedication. So you need to genuinely be interested in it. Don't study something because you heard it's a good thing to do or it's because what everyone else is doing. You need to find what suits you. Think about what you find genuinely interesting. So what classes were you most engaged in? Which books do you like reading most? Which articles were you happy reviewing? You need to tap into your natural curiosity. Often people say, I don't really know what I like. Well, you need to reflect on this. You need to be honest with yourself and actually accept where your interests lie, and you need to try and get a taste for things. So that might mean attending an online course, events, talks, conferences, or arranging some sort of work experience in a domain that you might be interested in. So as an example of that, when I was 16, I was fortunate enough to spend a week with my uncle at his medical practice, getting a flavor for the medical profession. And to be honest, after a week in it, I was convinced that this was no longer for me. So the truth is, you have to be proactive, you need to put the effort in, and you need to do the research and reflect and ultimately decide on what genuinely interests you and study that. Remember, it's better to excel in something niche than to be average in something popular. So pick something where your genuine interests lie. Now let's dive into the more specific things. Okay, now let's move on to a broad strategy. So this is how you set yourself up for success. These are the things that surround you when you go on your study journey. So the first thing to emphasize is that consistency over cramming is key. Studying, especially if you picked a subject that you're actually interested in, is not just about passing the exam. It's about diving deep, intimately understanding the subject, passing the exam, and continuing to apply it thereafter. So you need time and you need consistency to achieve that. You can't cram and expect to learn. That's not how it works. And if you're after a fast track to passing the exam, this video is not for you. This video is about studying effectively so you can take maximum value, maximum learnings, and continue to apply that through your life. Allowing yourself a longer study period with shorter, more digestible sessions is the most effective way to study. Studying for 7, 8, 9 hours on end is not going to be effective. In fact, it's going to be counterproductive because after a certain period of time, there will be diminishing returns and actually you risk burnout. The optimal session length is actually 90 minutes, and that usually constitutes 30 to 60 minutes of high focus followed by 30 minutes or so of lower focus. And this 90-minute cycle is governed by the ultradian rhythm. Now, that's an example of a biological cycle, and there's many of those that dictate how effectively you can study. If you push past this 90-minute mark, you're into diminishing returns territory. I'll touch on breaks in a second, but within the 90 minutes, you want to tackle your hardest, most cognitively demanding tasks first. So in the first 30 to 60 minutes, tackle that and sprint. You want to go hard, you want to focus without distraction. That means getting phones and all of the distractions out of the room, focusing on the task in hand, knowing that you only have to do it for 30 to 60 minutes is more motivating. Now, obviously, you're not only going to study for 30 or 60 minutes, but actually you want to work in cycles. So once you've done the 90 minutes, you need to step away for a break. And this break ideally needs to be a walk. And actually, a lot of the learning takes place away from the desk. So while you're walking, while you're sleeping, while you're cooking, all of those sort of things. And this links back into the point at the top that consistency is key over an extended period of time. This gives you time to work in those sprints and rest in between, to digest and recover and move away from the desk and formulate your approach and then go again. If you cram in a 1, 2, 3 month period for 10 hours a day before the exam, that's not effective. You're not doing it for the love of the subject at that point. You're doing it just to cram and pass the exam, and you'll forget it as soon as you do it. So if you want to learn properly, you need to give yourself time. I touched on it just now as well, but sleep is also key. You want to sleep and wake at the same time each evening and each morning. And it's also better to sleep early and wake up early. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So firstly, better to wake up early and attack your work. And the reason for that is when you are biologically at your freshest. And this is proven. Overnight, when you sleep, the spine releases a bunch of fluids that clear the brain of debris that accrued the previous day. So you come into the day with a fresh mind, ready to attack new concepts. In the evening, you really need to step away from work and give your brain time to breathe, and going into bed with as little stress as possible. Now, if you're studying all the way through to when you sleep, you'll go into bed with all of these concepts fresh in your mind, and it's very difficult to go to sleep after that, which then compromises the quality of the sleep afterwards, and then it makes it more difficult to wake up in the morning and so on. If you've allowed yourself a long enough period to study, then you'll be able to do this quite comfortably, but if you're cramming, that's when it becomes impossible. One final point is organization is key. Make sure you make clean notes, you organize them well, you file them away, you use bookmarks, you use color so you can distinguish things. Take pride in your studies and make sure that your desk is nice and clean so that you have a nice clean headspace so that you can use mental bandwidth to actually learn rather than to find things. So this part of the video was all about setting up your environment for success. So all of these things are a more holistic approach to studying. If you do these and you do these well, then the techniques that I cover off in the next part of the video will be even more effective. Okay, now that we know why we're doing it and we've optimized our environment, let's get into the tips and techniques. So first off, buy your notes if they're available. Now, I know most of you have this view that making your own notes is the most effective way to study, but actually most of the time it's a big waste of time. In your first run, you tend to focus on writing rather than listening to the lecture or whoever's teaching you, and then you have to go through it all again anyway, and actually you've just doubled the amount of time you're going to spend. Instead, if you buy the notes and you annotate and build on them and make separate notes for the most complex material, you'll have a super comprehensive set of notes, and you've been able to focus on what the lecturer is teaching you. This way you get the best of both. You've been able to spend time writing out the more complex material, and therefore you made the connection with your brain, but at the same time the more mundane stuff is covered off by the pre-made notes, and that saves you a lot of time which you can then devote towards learning. Then I would say the first run always needs to be a high level run, so don't get caught up in the detail. It's better to whiz through the curriculum and get a good overview of what it entails, and then to come back and drill deeper into the more complex stuff. A good analogy for this is if you were asked to navigate a city, would you rather be dropped at street level and asked to navigate from there, or would you rather get a bird's eye view map, have a good overview of what the city looks like, and then be dropped and navigate from there? You'd rather the latter. So this applies to studying too. Run through the material, get a good overview, then go back and go deeper. And start with the hardest topic. Now, this may not always be possible depending on if the hardest topic builds on the previous one, but I'm talking about at a given level. If it's possible to study things independently, start with the hardest topics because they're going to take the most time. So ask your teacher and look online and find out what the most difficult material is and start there, because you're going to need at least 2 or 3 run-throughs of that. So if you start there, you give your brain time to digest and absorb the material over a longer period of time. If you wait till the end, suddenly you're faced with a lot of difficult concepts and you don't have as much time to absorb them. Then this is an important one. Apply the Feynman technique. So you may or may not have heard of it, but simply put, this involves learning the concept, then finding someone and explaining to them. If you can't find someone else, speak out loud and explain it to yourself, but ultimately in the process of verbalizing it and actually trying to explain it to someone, you will be able to identify the gaps in your knowledge so that now when you go back to the topic, you know where to focus your attention. So this is a super effective way of studying and will really fast track your growth. Then when it comes to exam preparation, find the hardest questions and tackle those, and if you need to refer to your notes, that's no problem at all. The whole point of the questions is to convert knowledge to application. There's very little chance you can start answering questions without going back to the material. And also, don't worry if you get things wrong. Don't be demoralized. This is part of the process. You'd much rather get them wrong in the practice than in the real exam. And finally, when you get to the exam itself, a couple of key things apply here which really helped me. Number one, make sure you read the question first and then read the passage of information. So if you're doing the type of exam where there's a bunch of information that precedes the questions, there's no point reading the information, then reading the question, because then you go back and read the information all over again, and that wastes time. So if you read the questions first, you know where to focus your attention, and then when you read the passage, you know what you're looking for. The second thing is, if you come across questions that you don't understand, don't waste time, move on immediately. If it's a computer-based exam and there's a flag function, use that so that you can easily identify which questions to come back to. But if it's not, and if it's paper-based, leave a star next to it, whatever it might be, or make a separate note, and then move on. Try and get as many of the questions done first. That takes some pressure off, and then you can approach the questions that you flagged second time with a little bit more freedom and the knowledge that you've answered a bulk of the questions already. Answering as many questions as possible and getting as many marks as possible is key. That wraps this up. I hope you found that helpful, and if you like this video, hit like and subscribe for more content like this moving forward. Thank you, and see you in the next video.